I never thought the sound of a turning lock could make my heart skip a beat. It was supposed to be a regular tutoring session, just like every Thursday evening for the past 6 months. Same walk through the narrow lanes, same knock on the dark wood door of his apartment, same polite smile he always gave when he opened it. But today felt different. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he looked at me a few seconds longer than usual, or maybe it was the quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in just before something changes. His apartment was small but tidy, the air always smelling faintly of cedarwood and cardamom. The bookshelves lining the walls were full of thick, worn texts, mostly on language and history, with the occasional novel tucked in between like a secret. I always liked that about him. He wasn't just what people assumed he was. And I suppose I wasn't either. My name is Aman. I'm 23, freshly graduated, stuck in that strange limbo between responsibility and freedom. I come from a family that likes boxes. Be this, don't be that. I've learned to survive by staying silent, by being what they need me to be. But when I'm here in his presence, I feel something unnameable tugging at me, like the walls I've spent years building grow thinner every time he speaks. He's older than me by at least 8 or 9 years. He doesn't talk much about himself. That's part of his mystery. Calm, observant, patient. He carries himself with a quiet authority that makes you want to lean in closer just to hear what he's thinking. I tell myself I come here for language lessons. But really I come for him. That's the truth I've never said out loud. Tonight he made tea before we even began. That was the first sign. He handed me the cup and sat closer than usual, our knees almost touching beneath the low table. His voice was steady, but I could hear something softer hiding beneath it. "How's your week been?" he asked. I wasn't used to small talk from him. Usually we jumped right into grammar. The question felt intimate. I mumbled something about work and deadlines, trying to keep my eyes off his hands as he stirred his tea. But then he got up, walked over to the door and turned the lock. Just one click. Not dramatic. Not loud. But enough to echo in my chest like a warning, or a promise. He turned back to me slowly, and I swear there was something new in his eyes. And that's when I realized, I wasn't just a student anymore. Something was about to shift between us. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but had been wanting all along. The first time I met him, I'd shown up late. It was raining hard that day. My hoodie was soaked, my shoes made embarrassing squeaking sounds as I entered the room, and I remember stammering an apology while he simply looked up from his book and said, "You're here. That's enough." No scolding, no raised eyebrow, just calm acceptance, like he'd already figured me out in the first 30 seconds. He never asked personal questions, not at first. He taught with patience, with a quiet clarity that made complex things feel simple. And I, in turn, found myself looking forward to Thursdays in a way I couldn't explain. Our lessons became less about language and more about rhythm, the steady rhythm of two people who didn't need to fill silence to feel understood. Over time, our conversations stretched beyond the subject matter. Sometimes he'd tell me about something he'd read, or a weird dream he had, or a line from a book he couldn't stop thinking about. Once, he recited a poem in Arabic, translating as he went, voice low and slow, like the words meant more than he could say. I pretended to focus on the meaning, but the way he spoke, that soft precision, lingered with me for days. And somewhere in all of that, our dynamic shifted. We started teasing each other, small sarcastic remarks that made him raise a brow and made me feel bold. "You know," I said once as he corrected my pronunciation for the 3rd time in a row, "I think you enjoy making me feel stupid." He smirked. "Not stupid. Just challenged." That became a running joke. Anytime I stumbled over a word, I'd say, "Here we go, your favorite part of the day," and he'd shake his head like he was pretending to be annoyed. Last week, he'd mentioned offhandedly that his building was doing maintenance over the weekend, and he'd have to clear out his room for a couple of days. I offered to help before I could think twice. He'd hesitated. Just a flicker. Then, "You sure? Unless you're worried I'll organize your books alphabetically," I said. "God forbid." So that's how I ended up back at his place this week. No books today, no lesson plan. Just 2 cardboard boxes, some takeout on the table, and music playing low from his phone, something instrumental and moody. We were halfway through packing when the power went out. I thought it was a joke at first, but when I looked up, the room had dimmed completely. Only the fading evening light filtered in through the sheer curtains, making everything look soft and shadowed. He stood by the window, phone in hand, checking notifications. "Transformer blew out," he said after a moment. "Might be ours." Of course. He lit a candle from a drawer. Just one, but it cast this golden circle around us that made the room feel smaller. Warmer. More personal. We sat back down on the rug, both of us barefoot now, boxes half-packed. I could hear my own heartbeat a little too clearly. At one point he reached to grab something behind me, a charger maybe, and his hand brushed mine. Not a big touch. Not on purpose maybe. But I froze for half a second longer than I should have. He noticed. I know he did. His eyes flicked to mine, and for the first time in 6 months of quiet familiarity, I saw him hesitate. It was quick, barely there, but real. The candle flame danced between us, making his face look softer. More vulnerable. I looked away before I could stare too long. Still think I enjoy making you feel stupid? He asked, voice lighter again. Only slightly less than organizing your chaos. Touché. We laughed. It sounded normal. Easy. But everything under the surface had changed. And I think we both felt it. The power didn't come back. The candle burned lower, casting shadows on the walls, making his apartment feel smaller than usual. We'd stopped packing. Without music or electricity, the silence between us had become something different. Not awkward exactly, but charged. Every sound was sharper. Every movement more noticeable. I'll make some tea, he offered suddenly, standing up. How? I asked, half smiling. He held up a small gas stove he kept for emergencies. Primitive ways still work. I watched him from where I sat on the rug, his figure outlined in flickering light as he moved about the kitchen. Something about the quiet competence in the way he did things always got to me. He didn't rush. He didn't fumble. There was a stillness about him that I both admired and found maddening. Like nothing ever broke through his calm. Like nothing ever touched him. And I wanted to touch him. God, I hated admitting that to myself. He returned with 2 mismatched mugs, the steam rising lazily between us as he sat cross-legged on the floor, closer than before. The rug was narrow. I could feel the heat of his leg brushing against mine, and even though I could have shifted, I didn't. I didn't want to. This might be the first time I've seen you this quiet, he said softly, sipping his tea. I shrugged. Not used to candlelit tutoring sessions. He smiled at that. It's not a lesson anymore. No. He looked over at me. There was something unreadable in his expression. Not tonight. The silence returned, thicker this time. My fingers tightened around the mug. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to lean in, say something, do something, but my fear was louder than my longing. I'd spent years folding myself into shapes that didn't scare anyone, didn't raise suspicion, didn't make waves. I didn't know how to be this person, didn't know if I was allowed. He shifted beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. You're shivering. I'm fine, I lied. Without asking, he got up and disappeared into his room. A moment later he came back with a thick gray hoodie. Here. I'm not cold. You're a terrible liar. He handed it to me anyway. His fingers brushed mine again, warm, lingering. This time neither of us pretended it didn't happen. I put it on. It was oversized and soft, and it smelled like him, cedar and something else I couldn't place, something that made me feel simultaneously comforted and exposed. My heart thudded loudly in my chest, and I prayed he couldn't hear it. He sat back down, this time even closer, knees touching. I didn't move. I forget how young you are sometimes, he murmured. I'm not that young. No, you're not. His voice had dropped, quieter, more thoughtful. I turned to look at him, and he was already looking at me. Not in that polite, distant way he usually did. No, this was different. His gaze didn't skim past mine. It held. Steady. Searching. I'm sorry, he said almost under his breath. I shouldn't have said that. It's okay. Another beat of silence. Then. Do you ever wonder if we're pretending this is something it's not? I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes flicked down just for a second. Sometimes. And I think, we're both just afraid to name it. The air left my lungs in one slow exhale. He looked at me again. There was no smile now. Just honesty. And something that made my chest ache. I swallowed. If we say it out loud, everything could change. I know. But also, maybe it's already changing. His hand moved slightly, fingers brushing mine again. Only this time he didn't pull away. My throat was dry. I couldn't think. I couldn't look away from him. The room felt impossibly quiet, like even the walls were holding their breath. You're scared? He said gently. Yeah. So am I. I stared at his hand resting next to mine. My fingers twitched, hesitated, and then moved, closing the space between us. I let my hand rest on his. Just that. He didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his hand over and held mine properly. His grip was warm, sure. You don't have to say anything, he whispered. But I wanted to. My entire body was screaming for it. My voice cracked. I stopped, breathed in, tried again. I think I've wanted this for a long time. His thumb moved slowly over the back of my hand. I know, he said. And just like that, the distance between us dissolved. We sat there like that for a while, his hand in mine, both of us too afraid to move, too afraid not to. The candle burned lower, the wax pooling quietly, and every second that passed without one of us speaking made the silence feel heavier, fuller. Not empty. Not awkward. Just full, with all the things we hadn't said, hadn't let ourselves even think too clearly until now. I could hear the soft tick of his wall clock. The quiet sound of our breathing. I wanted to break the silence, but I didn't know how. Every word I thought of felt too much or not enough. There was no neat way to unravel what had been building inside me for months. So instead, I said the only thing I could. I don't want to leave. He turned his head just slightly. Tonight. No, I said. I mean, in general. I don't want to stop coming here. I don't want this. I looked down at our hands, our fingers gently laced together, to go back to how it was. He didn't speak right away. I could see him processing, his brow drawn ever so slightly in thought. Then quietly, what do you think this is? I hesitated. It's not just tutoring. It hasn't been for a long time. Has it? His hand tightened slightly around mine. No, it hasn't. That should have relieved me, but instead, it made my stomach twist with a new kind of fear. Because now it was real. Now there were consequences. I've been trying to talk myself out of this feeling for weeks, I said, laughing nervously. Telling myself I was misreading everything. That you were just kind. Just calm. That I was being stupid. You're not stupid, he said firmly, shaking his head. You never were. I've never, I paused, struggling. I've never said any of this out loud before. I know. You're the first person who's ever made me feel, I broke off again. I don't even know how to explain it. You don't have to. But I wanted to. I needed him to understand. I feel like I can breathe when I'm with you, I said. And at the same time, I'm constantly terrified. Because I know if I let myself fall any further, I won't be able to pull back. He stared at me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were glassy, like something inside him was trembling just as much as I was. I feel the same, he said finally, barely more than a whisper. My breath caught. You do. I tried to keep things simple, he admitted. To keep a line between us. I told myself it wasn't fair. You're younger. You look at me with all this hope. Like I have answers. But I don't. I'm just as confused. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, soft and overwhelming. I don't need you to have answers, I said. I just need to know I'm not alone in this. He looked at me then, really looked. There was no more hiding in that gaze. Just honesty. Vulnerability. You're not, he said. I don't know who moved first. I don't remember deciding to lean in. But suddenly we were closer. His face inches from mine, his breath warm against my lips. Is this okay? I asked, voice shaking. He nodded. Yes. And then his hand came up to the side of my face, his palm resting against my jaw. It was the softest touch I'd ever felt, like he was still deciding if this was real. I closed my eyes. When our lips met, it wasn't perfect. It was tentative, slow, almost unsure, like two people stepping into new territory with trembling steps. But it was also everything. Months of tension, longing, restraint, all of it unraveled in that quiet moment. His lips were warm, patient. He kissed like he didn't want to scare me off, like he was trying to memorize how this felt. I pulled back only slightly, my forehead resting against his. Okay, I whispered. Now I'm terrified and happy at the same time. He let out a small laugh, a sound I hadn't heard from him before. Soft, breathless, freeing. Welcome to the club, he murmured. There was a pause. Then he said, more serious, I don't want to hurt you. That's my biggest fear. You won't, I said, surprising even myself with how sure I sounded. I might. Not on purpose, but I spent a long time keeping people out. It's not easy to let someone in. Then don't let someone in, I said. Let me in. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for a very long time. And then he kissed me again, deeper this time. Still gentle but less afraid. Like he believed me. We sat there for what felt like hours, barely moving. Sometimes kissing. Sometimes just holding each other. He wrapped his arms around me at one point, and I pressed my face against his shoulder, breathing him in. The candle burned down until the room dimmed again, shadows stretching longer along the walls. In that darkness I felt something shift, not between us but inside me. Like for the first time I wasn't hiding anymore. The power came back on around midnight. The overhead light flickered, humming softly to life, but neither of us moved to switch it off. We stayed on the rug, still wrapped in each other, the dim orange glow from the dying candle somehow feeling more honest than the fluorescent buzz above. I was lying against his chest now, his arms slung over my shoulder, fingers tracing slow, thoughtful shapes on my back. Every now and then he'd shift slightly to look at me, like he still wasn't sure I was really here. "I still can't believe I kissed you," I murmured. "You think I can?" he said, smiling into my hair. "It's surreal. A week ago I was rehearsing how to pronounce diphthongs. Tonight I'm here. Wrapped in my hoodie, stealing my tea, confessing your soul. Basically squatting in your living room." He chuckled, low and warm. "You're always dramatic. And you're always calm. Annoyingly calm. Even after this. That's how I fake it." "Wait, you fake being calm?" He tilted his head toward me. "Do you think it's easy, sitting inches away from someone you want and pretending like everything is fine?" I felt myself smile. That kind of smile that starts in your chest and makes its way to your mouth slowly, like it wants to be savored. "You wanted me?" "Still do," he said without hesitation. That shut me up for a moment. My cheeks burned. I buried my face against his shoulder again, half embarrassed, half too full of something I didn't yet have a word for. "You're not what I expected," I admitted after a pause. "And what did you expect?" "I don't know. I thought you'd be distant, detached, too composed to feel anything as messy as this." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been composed for years. It's exhausting. You're the first person who ever made me want to stop." That landed in my chest like a stone tossed into still water, rippling out, touching everything. I turned slightly so I could look up at him. "So what happens now?" His hand found mine again. He laced our fingers slowly, like he didn't want to rush the answer. "I don't know," he said. "But I want to find out, with you. You're not scared." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But I think that's okay. We don't need all the answers tonight." "And what about people?" I asked softer now. He didn't flinch. "Let's figure us out first. Let's make this real and strong in here, before worrying about out there." I nodded. That made sense. That felt safe. "Okay," I said. He smiled. "Okay. Okay." Then he leaned in and kissed me again just once, soft and slow. There was no hesitation now. No tension. Just the quiet confidence of being seen and wanted, fully without shame. We stayed up a while longer talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his first teaching job. I told him how I once failed an exam because I couldn't stop daydreaming about him correcting my essays. He rolled his eyes. I teased him about alphabetizing his bookshelf. He threatened to revoke my tea privileges. By the time I realized how late it was, we were curled up under a blanket he'd pulled from the closet, legs tangled together. His fingers had stopped tracing patterns, now resting lazily against my side. "You know," I whispered, "I think I'll still come on Thursdays." He laughed under his breath. "Just Thursdays. For now." His hand found mine again and he squeezed gently. "For now," he repeated. "But let's not stop there." And in that moment I knew we wouldn't. The next morning I woke up before him. The apartment was quiet, still dim with early light slipping in through the curtains. For a moment I just watched him, peaceful, one arm draped across the edge of the blanket, chest rising and falling with steady breath. He looked younger like that. Softer. Less guarded. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake him, and stretched. My shoulder brushed his as I moved, and instinctively, his hand reached for mine in his sleep, fingers curling around mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. That simple gesture caught me off guard. Not dramatic. Not passionate. Just real. Like something our bodies had already decided for us before our minds could catch up. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let our hands stay tangled and leaned back against the pillow, letting myself enjoy the silence. The comfort. The rightness of it all. Eventually his eyes blinked open. "You're staring," he said, voice rough with sleep. "You're holding my hand in your sleep." He mumbled, eyes drifting shut again. "Not sorry." I laughed quietly. "Neither am I." He turned onto his side, head propped up by his hand. "You still good?" I nodded. "Better than good. Still scared. A little. But it's different now." "Good," he said, brushing his thumb lightly across the back of my hand. "I don't expect this to be easy. But I want it to be honest." "We can do that," I said. "I want that too." We got up eventually, he made breakfast, I set the table. It was simple, unremarkable. Scrambled eggs, toast, the same tea he always made. But it felt different this time. Like we were already learning how to live in the same rhythm. Small domestic moments that felt intimate. While we ate, he looked at me and said, "You know you'll have to help me reorganize those books, right?" I groaned. I knew there was a catch. "We could label the shelves by genre," he said, clearly enjoying my pain. "You are such a librarian. You're lucky I like you." I smiled at that. I know. Before I left that morning, I paused at the door, my hand resting on the frame. He stood a few steps behind me, arms folded across his chest, watching quietly. I turned, unsure of what to say. I didn't want a dramatic goodbye. I didn't want to leave things hanging in the air. So I walked back, stood in front of him, and reached up to fix the slightly crooked collar of his shirt. Something small, something completely unnecessary. But the way he looked at me while I did it, like he saw everything, it said more than either of us needed to. Then I kissed him. Just once, soft and sure. "I'll see you Thursday," I whispered. He smiled. "You better." I walked out into the sunlight, hoodie still clinging to me like a secret, heart somehow steadier than it had been in years. There would be questions. There would be fears. But there would also be him. And for now, that was enough.